Carol Baird and Alan Harper's garden contains an extensive oak woodland. This garden is maintained by Noah Miller of Our Vital Land. I would like to thank Maurice Phillips, who made the video that we'll be seeing about this garden, and Jason Bull, who took the drone footage. So for those of you who are wondering what you could plant under our native oaks, this plant list from the Harper Baird garden will show you, and also some of the plants we'll be seeing today. So longtime friends and garden tour supporters, Carol Baird and Alan Harper, live on a 5-acre lot in the Oakland Hills. This property has a majestic oak bay woodland with a thriving, diverse understory of native plants. Starting in 2003, they began weeding out invasive non-natives and allowing native plants to move back in. So here's a photo of a trillium that's growing in their oak woodland. In May, variable checker spot, swallowtail, and other butterflies are frequently seen, as are alligator and western fence lizards and a variety of native bees. Commonly seen birds include Anna's hummingbirds, Hutton's vireos, and an orange-crowned warblers. But western tanagers and even a pileated woodpecker have been spotted, as one year so was this baby quail. So let's go now and meet with Noah Miller, who tends the garden. Hi, Noah, how are you?
Hi, fine. How are you, Kathy?
Good, thanks for joining us today. So how long have you been working on Alan and Carol's property?
I think it's about 7 years at this point.
Oh, wow.
And that's such a privilege to be able to work on one garden for such a long time and get to see it change and grow.
And such a beautiful one as well.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to say to people before we launch into your video?
I would say that, most people don't have 5 acres of oak woodland to work with, but there are, I still think, so many things that can be learned from what grows in this garden. And I want to say a big thank you before we see the video to Maurice for making such a fabulous video.
Yeah, she did. All right, well, let's go look at the video then.
Welcome to the garden. Much of this garden is oak woodland. Coast live oaks, bay laurels, and the occasional madrone grow on these north-facing slopes where they aren't exposed to the full drying heat of the sun.
Coast live oak and bay laurel create a lush woodland habitat in the Oakland Hills.
Much of the garden faces north, so during a good part of the year, some areas barely get any direct sunlight at all, and others get a little. The dense canopy of the oaks makes things even shadier.
The bay laurel has yellow flowers in winter, specifically evolved to protect the pollen from getting wet, and thus providing nectar for bees during the rainy season. In fall, its fruits resemble small avocados. The large nut inside can be roasted and taste like coffee. The evergreen canopy provides year-round shade for the abundance of understory plants growing here.
There are several native plants that grow naturally in this kind of environment, like some of our ferns. The western sword fern stays at least partly green year-round. The wood fern and the little goldback fern, which I love for its shape and for that strikingly bright surface when you turn the leaf over, all of them put out lush green growth after the winter rains. And by the time we're in the depth of our summer drought, they've pretty much dried up into a crisp, but below ground they are ready to start again next winter. We find goldbacks and maidenhairs showing up in parts of the oak woodland where there's a bit more moisture, but where the water can move through the soil. Like they love the steep little slopes that are formed by our trails cutting into the hillside. So if you plant them in your garden, I'd try to give them similar conditions. A nice, relatively moist, steep slope to cling to out of the sun.
Over 40 species of native plants make up the understory here. This lush diversity begins to come to life each year as the soil receives moisture from winter rains. It peaks in spring as the soil dries out, seeds ripen, and many plants turn brown and are dormant until the next rainy season.
Some other things that emerge from their underground reserves in the early months of the year. Wild cucumber, also called manroot, because its underground structure can be as big or bigger than a person. It sends up gorgeous vines decorated with these fantastic white or yellowish flowers, depending on the exact species, and awesome curlicues of tendrils that let it climb up structures in your garden. It makes these super cool spiky cucumbers. And one of my absolute favorite understory shrubs is osoberry. It flowers in the late winter or early spring and is not the showiest, but the flowers are charming and they're followed up by lime green new leaves. Since oaks are the hub of the community of living things here, we have to keep ourselves informed about sudden oak death and do what we can to prevent its spread. Sudden oak death has killed huge numbers of oaks, tan oaks, and other plants in California. During rainstorms, the pathogen travels in splashes of water from the leaves of infected bay laurels to the trunks of nearby oaks. The oaks can get infected through other vectors too, but bay trees are by far the main culprit. For this reason, we remove new bay trees that sprout in the garden. But we also have several majestic older bay trees which we've chosen to keep, so we try to protect the oaks in some additional ways. That includes following the treatment protocols developed by UC Berkeley's plant pathology lab. We inject the most prominent oaks with a substance that has been shown to boost their resistance to the pathogen, at least for a while. With years of carefully timed, thorough weeding, we've been able to bring back the natives, as it were, to this slope. On the hot south-facing side, purple needlegrass dominates, mixed with California sagebrush, which we cut to the ground every couple years to keep it small, and coyote brush, which we keep in check because it does like to take over, and the occasional monkey flower, and some other things. On the more northern-facing part of the slope, we get beautiful melic grasses and more little herbaceous plants like blue-eyed grass, ferns, and yerba buena. Sometimes we see pipevine swallowtails on the buckeye trees. So basically what we do out here is we take out invasive annual grasses, and for the most part it's pretty easy to distinguish between these European grasses that got introduced like this milky oat and our native bunt grasses like this purple needlegrass, because the oats will just come right out. They have a really shallow root system, and if I try to tug on this purple needlegrass, come up here and get a close picture. So, okay, here's oat, comes right out. Tug on the needlegrass, it won't really come out. So they have deep root systems that go down several feet. So we take out the oats, we take out thistles, invasive thistles, and some other things that are sucking up the moisture and competing for space, shading out our natives, and that gives the natives a fighting chance. So we have a bunch of purple needlegrass that has come back in here, a lot of soaproot, some blue-eyed grass, and melic grass. We've got a number of great native plants on this slope. There's lots more restoration to do on this grassy slope, but it's gratifying to see how much progress we've been able to make. I'm thankful to Lynn Talkowski, who set the whole thing in motion, and more recently to Glenn Schneider of Skyline Gardens, who has taught me a lot about how to do and think about this kind of project.
Hi, I'm Alan Harper. I live here. Got a background in zoology, a PhD in zoology, and spend a lot of time in Baja California. Actually, I'm working right now on a plant field guide. Carol and I lived in the neighborhood for now almost 35 years. Told me about this lot that I didn't even know was for sale. I thought it was park, and she said, go buy the lot and build a house.
Acorns from the live oak are a mainstay for many animals. Trees provide excellent habitat for insects, birds, rodents, reptiles, and mammals.
Not all of the garden is oak woodland. Some areas blend natives and exotics. For example, Heuchera maxima, a version of coral bells from California's Channel Islands, and our local heucheras work well in borders and mixed plantings in parts of the garden that don't get too much heat. One of the great things about this garden is that sometimes we discover new things on the property. So for example, just this year, we found this beautiful checker lily growing on the slope here. We had never seen one of these here before. It just showed up. Thanks a bunch for taking time to learn about our garden. I hope you enjoy the rest of the virtual Bringing Back the Natives tour.
So Noah, that was terrific. Thank you very much. So I'm wondering, you have about 40 species or so of native plants. Like, are there any favorite plants of yours from the Allen and Carroll's?
Oh yeah. Well, I'll talk for a second about I really love fragrances, and there are a few plants that you know, I love just brushing up against in this garden. So of course we have the bay trees, which, as I mentioned, have a problematic relationship with the live oaks, but boy, the smell of those bay leaves when you're working with them is just fantastic. And then the fragrant pitcher sage also got a couple of images in that slideshow, in that video. And it really lives up to its name. It smells so good, as well as the hummingbird sage, which is a popular sage with magenta towers of flowers. So those are some really lovely smelling plants, and I'm really drawn to those.
And beautiful ferns. You have a number of different kinds of ferns there, don't you?
Yes. Yeah. So as I was saying, that it's pretty shady under these oaks, and one thing that does okay with that shade is the ferns, and we have 4 or 5 different species that show up in different places. One that I didn't mention was the western chain fern. It's a gigantic fern, can be, I don't know, 6 or 8 feet across, and that was planted. It's not native to the site. It tends to like sort of areas near streams and but it's doing okay without a stream in our garden. So yeah, ferns are a big part of the greenery, and without irrigation, like I say, they do get kind of crispy and brown in the fall, but that's part of the cycle of the garden.
So what advice would you have for someone who feels like, okay, I'm fired up after Doug telling me his talk. I want to plant an oak. I want to start my own native plant garden. Do you have any tips for how people can, of course, we're not going to be living on a 5-acre lot in the Oakland Hills, but how can we create our own like beautiful native habitat in our smaller lots?
One thing that I would recommend doing is going out and taking some walks in whatever your closest natural area is, wildland area is, and just start noticing what's growing around. And start to think like a plant a little bit. You know, if you stand outside your house and start to notice what time of day is the sun coming through, and you know, where is the water flowing in this garden, and then you go out into the parks and so forth and see what happens in areas that get similar sun exposure and water. Then you probably are going to have better luck choosing plants that are going to thrive in your garden. You know, it also really plugs you in better to the land that you're on. I also, of course, recommend talking to the knowledgeable folks at, say, Native Here Nursery or Oaktown Nursery or East Bay Wilds, who can really help steer you in the right direction.
So, well, thank you for that segue. So I always recommend that people check out the Find a Designer list on the Bringing Back the Native Garden Tours website. So if you're thinking, well, gosh, I just don't walk, you know, out in local native areas and know my plants, you can hire somebody who can help you make good decisions about what plants will do well in your yard, and you know what will look nice and when to plant them and how far apart and so on. So the Find a Designer list is on the tour's website, about halfway down on the left-hand side. Somebody just asked me about the plant list for the garden we've just seen, and that is also on the tour's website. So if you go to today's agenda, you can link over, click on Alan Harper and Carol Baird, and you'll link over to their garden, and their plant list is there. Or you could look at view the 2022 gardens in Oakland, and you'll see their plant list there with a full description of this garden. So let's see, Noah. Have you had sudden oak death on the oaks on this property?
You know, it's hard to say whether we've had it on the oaks, but we do know that some of the bay trees have had it, which means that you know, the oaks are in danger. So I'll recommend folks to participate in this citizen science project called Sod Blitz, Sudden Oak Death Blitz, which results in the sod map. And that's run by the UC Berkeley lab that really focuses on sudden oak death. They will give you kits to go out and collect bay leaves, and then they test them, and what comes out of that is a very useful map that shows exactly where Phytophthora ramorum, the sudden oak death pathogen, has been detected in the area.
Okay, and then people, if you might want to look at your chats, Robin Mitchell, our excellent garden ambassador on YouTube, just put up a link to the Sudden Oak Death Blitz website, so you can get that website there. Elizabeth Airy asked, where can I find out more about the substance that you are injecting into the trees?
Also, I'm sure on that website, if the link is to suddenoakdeath.org, they've got a diagnosis and management, best management practices page there. Okay.
And let's see, someone asked about fire and fire management. I want to point out that if you look at the garden description for this garden, which is Carol Baird and Alan Harper in Oakland, you'll see that Alan is giving a talk on fire management on the day of the tour on Saturday, April the 30th. There'll also be an ethnobotany talk, and there's one other talk that I can't remember. And Alan, who is an author, one of the co-authors of a recently published book on the flora of Baja, will be selling his book if that's what people have an interest in. But let me circle back to fire. So can you talk about the fire management strategies that you've been working on?
Yeah. Well, so one part of the video that you just saw was a big grassy slope. And before Alan and Carol moved in, that was mostly covered up by coastal shrub kind of plants. So a lot of coyote brush and poison oak and some sagebrush, big shrubs. And the fire department required them to create a defensible space down that slope, about 100 feet down the slope. And so they mowed it down as was required by the fire department. And that was really sort of the genesis of that grassy slope, because a bunch of weeds came in immediately and erosion started happening. And so that's why we've been attempting to restore it to a native grassland. Still gets mowed every year to prevent fire from coming up that canyon and quite as easily reaching the house. But you know, there's a balancing act that we have to perform, because I know that you know, a big theme of this tour is habitat for native animals, and some of that involves leaving some dead branches and so forth in place. And so we do some of that, but we also, you know, I spend a lot of my time cutting out dead wood and because there's just so much, and it is a fire risk. So it's like I said, it's a balancing act.
So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the Bradley method.
Sure.
People who are interested in environmental restoration, either of their own yard or in larger patches of area.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so this is a method developed by some women in Australia working on bush restoration. And it involves focusing on areas that have a strong presence of native plants, which translates to a strong native seed bank, and removing the invasive plants around them so that you give them some breathing rooms, you give them some space to seed in and spread. It's a very slow way of doing landscape restoration, but we have had a fair amount of success in this area and on this slope, just being very diligent about removing the invasive plants, mostly annual grasses, and giving space for those purple needlegrass and the melic grasses and so forth to seed themselves back in.
So thank you. And I know that you are active with the Skyline Gardens Alliance project. I'm going to be talking about it very, very briefly tomorrow when I introduce Bob Sorensen's garden. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that project and your involvement and how people could get involved.
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, I'm not sure that I have all that information at my fingertips, but I can tell you about my personal experience with it. And let me just put it also in terms of such a fantastic way to develop a connection with place. Just like I was saying, it's been such a privilege to be the caretaker of this particular piece of land, which is, you know, a piece of Ohlone ancestral territory that for many millennia was taken care of by people. And, you know, I don't know, I feel like it's such a privilege to be taking care of it now. Skyline Gardens has taken in under its wing several acres up near Tilden Regional Park. It's on East Bay mud land that has a very high biodiversity. I mean, I think it's the most plant diverse area in the East Bay, and full of fantastic wildflowers and so forth. The project basically uses the Bradley method and some other methods of removing invasive weeds and relies on a large number of volunteers to come and do that kind of maintenance work, and has uncovered and allowed to flourish many of these native plants. It's just a fantastic place, a fantastic group of people. Their website, which hopefully somebody can post.
Yeah, we'll put it
Yeah.
up. Well, I put Noah on the spot there, but I brought it up because I bumped into Noah
Yeah.
at Skyline Gardens Restoration Project about 6 weeks ago, and they also are using the Bradley method of controlling invasive plants and allowing native plants to move in. And so it's not talking about Alan and Carol's, but it's the same method. And I wanted to say, since we're not going to be joining Noah to weed at Alan and Carol's lot, if you wanted to get out in nature, do some restoration work, learn about native plants, meet some nice people, have fun and do good, you could look up the Skyline Gardens Alliance. They work near this Tilden steam train twice a week, I think on Thursday afternoons and Sunday mornings.
Exactly.
It's a great way to get to know native plants, learn something about restoration, and just have a wonderful time. So I wanted to kind of end on.
Yes, they value camaraderie and snacks and natural beauty, and so I'm all aboard for that.
Yeah, it was beautiful and fun. So Noah, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And Maurice Phillips, I want to thank you in particular for making that beautiful video. Noah, thank you so much then.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've talked about selecting plants and where to put them and how to get moving forward. And I mentioned I think the importance of finding a designer to help you plan your garden, because I know I designed and installed and designed and installed and designed mine like many times, and it just never looked good until I got professional help. And I got my professional help from 4 Dimensions Landscape Company. So it's hard to know how to design a garden, what plants have similar needs for water and light, how big those plants are going to get when they're mature, what kind of drainage they want, what plants will look good together. If you're interested in converting your garden to natives, I always recommend that people work with a company that specializes in designing native plant gardens, and let that designer know that you want a native plant garden. If you'd like help designing and installing a native plant garden, you might want to contact 4 Dimensions Landscape Company. 4 Dimensions is an award-winning landscape design company whose motto is restoring the earth, one garden at a time, and whose goal it is to bring people and nature together. Four Dimensions creates well-planned, carefully crafted environments that enrich both humans and natural life. You can call on 4 Dimensions to design, build, or nurture your garden. And you can reach them at 4dimensonslandscape.com or 510-893-1999. I'd like to thank our stalwart major funders, the Alameda County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, the Contra Costa Clean Water Program, the Contra Costa Water District, and the Clean Water Program Alameda County for their continued belief in this program and the funding that makes this tour possible. I'd like to thank the other sponsors for their support for this year's tour. And these sponsors as well. Garden Tour hosts Ann Chambers and Ed McAlpin have generously offered a $500 challenge grant if these funds can be matched with donations from viewers. If you haven't yet had the chance to contribute, please help by making a donation now. You can do so via the donations button on the tour's homepage at Bringing Back the Natives. You'll see it at the bottom. Through Venmo at Bringing Back the Natives, on the tour's GoFundMe page, or you can mail in a check. The tour's address is under Contact Us.